Good afternoon. Today we're glad to introduce you our exploration about nutrition and milk. We named our first phase food security, keep it safe, heat because we are talking about nutrition, and safe because our focus is about food security that exists when all people at all times have physical and economical access to sufficient, safe and nutritious food to meet their daily needs. So we decided to take a deeper look into this topic because we understand that in many countries are involved in situations of economical and nutritional deficit or nutritional excess that both leads to health problems and risks. All the data comes from the official website of FAO, the Food and Agricultural Organization of the United Nations, referring to the triennium from 2009 to 2011, because we register a peak of supplies, and they refer to the Americas as a representative continent of all the possible situations, including the borderline cases of highest and lowest economic access. The exploration follows the 4 pillars of food security that are availability, stability of supply, access, and utilization by the body. We discovered that in all the situations there are differences in the dietary energy requirement established as the most appropriate for each country and the actual level of food supply of the population. But what do people actually eat? We can say without any doubt that milk is the most consumed food worldwide, with the exception of the countries with the lowest economic access. So it's natural drinking milk and it's natural use it for different recipes. But how do people talk about it, and why there are a lot of milk substitutes during the grocery shopping? And may these milk substitutes really change the habits of more and more people? We decided to explore the web in order to answer to these questions. And we always started from the pasteurized cow milk because the 85% of all milk worldwide is produced by cows. We asked Google and Wikipedia in order to understand the dimensions.
So I'm outside of a brief, I'm supposed to have just 15. Sorry.
Google and Wikipedia help us to understand the dimensions of the issue. And there are 2 main clusters, the one at the top related to human health, the one at the bottom related to the ethical animal treatment. We decided to choose human health because more pertinent to our main topic of nutrition. So the question became, is drinking milk healthy? We Googled it, discovering the presence of a real debate on the web, proved by the presence of completely different opinions about the 5 main issues in which the discussion can be divided, for example, external agents, intolerance, and nutrients. The positive position means that being in favor to the good quality and to the advantages of pasteurized cow's milk. At the same time, we discovered the main actors and the main sources of the debate that are PubMed and the New York Times. We decided to compare them in order to understand how do they talk about the same topic. And it was quite interesting having on one side a common and daily source of news, and on the other a scientific database, because they usually refer to different targets, but as we expected, the main focus of the journalistic approach is about food and people, while the main focus of the database part, the scientific part, is about studies and treatments.
During the exploration of the debate, the recurring presence of plant milk alternative wasn't announced, so we decided to make our research on Google Trend with the query milk ads. And this research showed out the two main alternatives to cow's milk, which are coconut milk and almond milk. It's clear that the interest in these two types of milk substitutes started increasing during the last years. So we searched on Instagram the two hashtags almond milk and coconut milk, and we extracted the 100 most popular picture for each hashtag. We analyzed the hashtags correlated to these 200 pictures, and we divided them by category. The categories are representative of the motivation why the user has probably shared the images. We noticed that Silk and So Delicious are the two explicit brands in common between these 200 pictures, so we extracted as well the last 100 pictures for each brand. And at first we looked at the source of these pictures, so we noticed the images were self-produced or rebranded. The second result concerns the analysis of the images and their content by looking at two parameters that create the mood, that are brightness and recurring material. The aim of these procedures was to try to understand the mood that the producer wants to link to their brand. The recurring material were manually identified and divided in emerging categories, which are wood, pottery, ceramic, fabric, and plants and fruits. The mood in both cases are really the same. The most common material is wood, which is clearly present in more than half of the total amount of the pictures, followed by ceramic and fruits and plants. So we deduced that the brands want to communicate themselves through a familiar atmosphere as natural as possible, and it's undeniable that there is a mutual influence between the brands and the users. Although the activism in favor of milk alternative, we decided to stand on the side of the controversy that supports pasteurized cow's milk. We wanted to create our material naturally, and we decided to achieve that by using paper, which is a commonly used material, simple, daily, accessible, which allows different uses, and all these adjectives can be attributed to milk as well. Our aim was to try to clarify the arguments and the position about the controversy, and we decided to do that by simulating the moment of the choice of the product in the supermarket, being in front of different choices of milk. Our target are men and women who are directly involved in the purchase of food, who are actively aware, interested in the subject, and sensitive to their nutrition and health without any particular geographical position. For each type of milk, we associated our color, which is single and recurring through the website, in order to allow a simple reading. Also, the main color of the website, which is a light blue, is corresponding to the pasteurized cow's milk. So our position is shown visually as well in the website. There are direct comparisons between two types of milk at the time, and cow milk is always present and valued. The website is a single story, and the user can choose to delve into some issues thanks to a certain reading level.
So let's start with the website. We found a strong discussion between who says that the cow milk is healthy, and the part of is scared by the using of milk of cow milk. So we're running to a great activism concerning it to this opposition to the traditional milk. However, studying in deeper scientific papers, research, we realized that this progressivism view isn't such objective. So we chose the title, Unfolding the Mixed Doubts, for our website. To get started, we must ask ourselves a specific question. What is the milk? And what is milk and how is it used? Because it is not an obvious question. Because we can see more and more cases where different kinds of drinks or beverage are named milk, having different characteristics to the original, to the traditional cow milk. So this is the first question. Is milk so important? Does everybody drink milk? Is another fact from we want to start our journey. There are some FAO stats that tells that 6 billion people in the world drink is a consumer of milk. And also we can say that among the milk is among of the 5 most consumed foods in the world every day. You can see that in the second graph. At this point, we need to go a step further. Is drinking milk healthy? This is the starting point of our journey. In our site, we adopted a very common paradigm. It's the moment of the grocery shop, the grocery shopping. Our investigation is a journey through the shelves full of milk that you can find in a supermarket. This is the paradigm that we follow to our website. In order to answer these questions, we've chosen 4 kinds of milk, 4 types of milk that you can find at our desk, and you can try at the end of our explanation. We analyzed the higher demand on the worldwide supermarkets, and we find that these 4 kinds of milk are the most requested and the most present in the supermarket. We have taken in consideration also the most present in the literature. So we started from this screen presenting the 4 kinds of milk and specific some specifics about this kind of milk. For example, in the organic milk, we presented that the presence of hormones is one of the most significant differences between conventional and organic milk products, keeping the same benefits. And for each kind of milk, you can find another characteristic. You can find also the nutritional values in the other side of the bottle.
Okay, so now we just present milk and the main types of milk you can find in the supermarket. But in the website, we didn't express clearly our position on this topic. And this is the moment. Looking at the graph, it's clear how the situation on the controversy of milk on the web is not balanced at all. So we want to take part in this discussion and give advice on the reason why people should keep drinking the traditional milk. We are going to do that, telling you facts about milk compared with the other types of milk, in order to clarify some misconceptions. The first comparison is between cow's milk and plant milk, focusing on the ingredients. On one side, we can see cow milk has just one ingredient, milk itself. On the other side, both almond and coconut milk have much more ingredients added to make them taste, color, and density more similar to the traditional milk. And then we have lactose-free milk, and we don't want to force intolerant people to drink whole milk. But we want to say that the situation about this fact is not equal around the world. There are places where almost 100% of the population can actually digest milk. And anyway, there are some studies who prove that also these people can take a little quantity of lactose per day, and this quantity is almost a cup of milk. In all the pages of the website, there is the opportunity to have more information about the topic, clicking on the plus button. For example, here on the lactose details, you can choose the gender and your age to know how much calcium you should ingest in a day. Why is calcium related to lactose? Well, not everyone knows that is extremely related. The presence of the assimilation of calcium is extremely related to the presence of lactose in it. And then it's the turn of organic milk and cow's milk. And speaking about human health, the main fact that makes the difference between these two kinds of milk is the presence of hormones. But maybe what we know about organic milk is not so correct. As the graph shows, just 1% of dairy cows are hormones free. That means that all milk, or almost all milk produced, is contaminated. But thanks to the pasteurization process, the 90% of these hormones are eliminated. And then we have just cow's milk. We spoke about, in general, about cow's milk, but actually there are 4 kinds of cow milk. And they have different characteristics and quantity of nutrients. And where you can find the one that perfect, the better match with your needs. And a lot of people are choosing in this list. As we can see in the graph, there is a decrease of interest in women in favor of the other technologies, still belonging to the category of pasteurized milk. At the end of our website, we are asking, are you aware of these facts when you go to checkout? Yes or no? And for example, if you don't know, we have our main sources where you can find more information. And then we have the sharing button. Then maybe if you like, you can share with others. Thank you.
I do, but I mainly drink soya milk. But we have a project on milk in the lab. So.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So you can't talk about it?
I can, and I will. Yes. Thank you. That's really interesting. So we work with the Food Standard Agency in the UK, and so the Food Standard Agency works in this space around food safety. And one of the key topics that they're working on now in terms of giving advice is this huge debate around raw milk, right? So there's unpasteurized milk. And there is a very small, very vocal group of people who really say, this is enormous health benefits. If you want more information, I can talk a lot about raw milk. But what I was very interested in, actually, and this is part of the work that we're doing, is about locally produced milk. Right, so we are doing an ethnography now with a local dairy farmer, and he's the sole supplier of milk to our university, at the University of Sheffield. And so what I was wondering is how you chose the different categories for, cow's milk and then the other ones that you chose to look at, and why you didn't, for example, choose to look at the difference in terms of production processes, right? So, or proximity from farm to the supermarket, because one of the huge debates in the UK, and specifically the farm that we're working with, is about locally produced milk, right? And so what I was wondering, when you were talking us through, from the point of purchase in the supermarket, you know, these are maybe some options and choices that the consumer might think about. And then the narrative that you create on your website, in a way, why you made those choices and why you maybe didn't look at that dimension of, you know, locally produced. Because this is, you know, you mentioned kind of vegetarians and popular perceptions around different kinds of milk. So I was just wondering why maybe the kind of local angle wasn't part of it, because this is one of the things that we find a lot in our research, that you know, the closer the milk is to where you end up purchasing it, that's a huge selling point, and then that gets sort of sold as, you know, even more nutritional benefits because it's so close to the source. So essentially, a question about how you decided on how you kind of slice the alternative.
We had to choose we choose to tell the main story about milk. So we choose the daily experience of each one present in this room and every people that goes to supermarket. And the main milk that we find in the shelf of the supermarket are this one. We had the focus on the local, because about yes. We found that it's really expensive to produce milk, and there are many local farmers that are closing in these days, because it's really the price of milk, of maintaining cows, more cows than organic cows milk than the others is really high. So we put this like as focus if we want to know more, and we have also our source. With the more explanation, but we have to make a choice, so we choose just the global experience, the common and daily experience of the supermarket.
I have, as usual, a question from Theo Nagel. He says, as cow milk is not contained worldwide, I wonder if and how you analyze the controversy and, more importantly, the current use of alternatives in different cultures. Do you design your advocacy website specifically to target a Western audience, and what might be alternatives you could consider if aimed at informing other audiences? Have you got a question?
Well, actually, we started with research in English, and yeah, it's true, meat is not consumed every time in the same way. So, of course, it's more oriented for Americas, Australia, or European population.
Did you have any idea of these differences? So what are the extremes? I mean, who is the country that is consuming most and less?
One of the reasons is that the intolerant people are mostly Asiatic people. So almost 100% of Asiatic are intolerant to
100%?
Yes, almost 100%. Are intolerant to cow's milk, so they choose alternatives. They have soya milk, it's really common.
Who says that? The National Institute.
Okay. Who's the National Institute?
Okay, so if there are no questions, thank you. And
sharing the economy.
No, I'll stick it. I'll put it on the stick and I'll put it. That's fine. The only thing that would be great if I could get a time
Let's start.
break. That's one thing. Yeah.
Sorry.
That's fine.
Hi to everyone, we're group number 1, and we are Sherlock. My name is Lorenzo, Giulia, Chiara, Davide, Lorenzo, and Sia. And we have a question for you. Have you ever maybe hitchhiked to go to Milano, or maybe have you ever got a lift to go to your workplace, or maybe you run out of coffee and you have your neighbor that brings you some coffee? Yeah, this is easy, but what if you don't have a neighbor that helps you? Imagine if there's a system of services that helps you to find neighborhoods, to find neighbors to help you and give you this coffee or this lift to San Francisco or the book that you want. This actually already exists. This is a sharing economy. Time calls it as one of the 10 ideas that will change the world. But what is this sharing economy? It's a business model based on the traditional economy. The traditional economy is based on assets owned by a company in a vertical way. Sharing economy is based on a horizontal way. So the assets are owned by the product users and shared peer-to-peer. There is a demand and a supply connected by this flexible and collaboration. So we see that there are many services that you will see in the next slides. Many services like also share your private jet. But let's see what our research is gonna explore. We're gonna explore an official version thanks to data set collected by some companies. We're gonna map the web and the debate. And we're gonna tell you about our position. So, of course, when you start a project, you just look for the definition. So, what's the definition of sharing economy? There isn't just one definition. There's sharing economy, collaborative consumption, so on economy, collaborative consumption. There are many definitions. Experts, since it's a new business, experts are debating about what's the main meaning, and there is a little bit of confusion. We found out some data set from card companies and Calabariano. Card companies is an international agency for sharing economy owned by Jeremy Young, and Calabariano is owned by Marco Manieri. They gave us a data set of 300 and more companies. And we can see from this graph that from 2008 to 2014, there is a big growth of startups and companies. You can see this a growing phenomenon. And also from this data set, we saw that these companies, especially transportation companies, are very well funded. Like Uber is funded as much as 262 companies, $6 billion, and it's a lot. Here we can see two actors coming out, Uber and Airbnb. They're one of the main funded companies. Later on, we started mapping the web. For example, we checked some newspaper, the most important 15 newspaper in the world, English written, for free and online. From the text analysis, we found out all these words about the sharing economy. And here, we found also Uber, of course. This is the second time that we found this Uber. So, is the scientific community talking about Uber too, and the web? And what about before? Was Uber here before? So, we were a little bit confused, so we started with our protocol. We wanted to know about Uber and the sharing economy in 3 areas of subjects. In the news and newspaper, thanks to the platform LexisNexis. In the scientific community, academic community, thanks to Google Scholar. And on the web and formal blogs, thanks to Google Search. We insert our 4 queries from 2005 to 2015. And we got out a corpus of 1,000 of articles that we analyzed with script written by us, thanks to R, that is a statistical language. The output is an average use of work every year. And we can, from this output, we had our first analysis of words. You can see the years and the 3 areas. On the bottom right, you see the old words of the sharing economy. On the top left, the new words of the sharing economy. Like this 2013. In 2014, there's a big growth of new words on the top left, especially on LexisNexis and Google Scholar. And of course, we find Uber. In 2015, there are other many new words together with Uber and workers and law. All words related to the Uber issue. Before we had only Google Search, LexisNexis, now we also have Google Scholar. So we see that Uber has influenced the being discussed by the 3 fields, not only Google Scholar and LexisNexis, but also the scientific area. So Uber is always here. Let's see what's the perception. Thanks to our image analysis, we saw that Uber is has a medium level of process to a high level of process. We don't want to have a text analysis because Uber is all around the world, and especially has issues and was banned in 26 countries all around the world. So images is a universal language, and this is our output. We can see that here in this image that it's one of the main processes about Uber. And that's justified the relevance of these 3 fields. Let's go to our conclusion of this part. The sharing economy is a growing process. And Uber issues are related to the acceptance of this new model. Our position in this debate is pro Uber and pro the sharing economy. We wanted, with our new website, with our narrative website, to have two goals. One, to talk to people that know what Uber is and Airbnb is, but they don't know that it's a sharing economy. And also, we want to talk to people who know what is the sharing economy. Our advocacy is to protect Uber from misunderstandings, because right now you just see Uber protest Uber is bad. And also let people know about the potentiality of this sharing economy world and invite them to support it. Just to sum up, this is our website. There's a little bit of introduction and samples about the sharing economy and services. Details about this new model. Then we go to our research, personal research, and data about the theme. The key point of our advocacy, and then a little tool that will help you to understand. So, for example, do you know about Uber and Airbnb?
Yeah.
Everyone knows about it? Maybe there's someone that doesn't know about it.
I don't know.
You don't know about it. So, Airbnb is a service that connects people with a single platform to share their apartment. Uber is a car-sharing service that connects passengers and drivers thanks to an app. There are many others of these services like Uber and Airbnb. For example, you can rent your suit for one-night party. Or maybe you can find your ideas without a backbone, or find someone to help you to move. Or maybe you need some physiotherapy and you don't have a cyclet. This is a sharing economy, where it's access over ownership, we have a redistribution, and a collaborative economy. But this sharing economy is driven by three main topics: mobile devices and platforms, thanks to the connection with internet and mobile data, all the world is connected. We have financial flexibility increase, and also population density increase. Sharing economy is also based on reputation and trust. Thanks to feedbacks, gamification, and social profiles, you can trust your neighbor that is all over the world. What are these themes connected to the sharing economy? As we saw before, in 2015, we had business, of course, but also Uber. Uber was here also in 2014. But let's say, for example, in 2009, we weren't talking about business or money, we were talking about design, people, and social. So we have this difference between the beginning of the sharing economy and now. As we saw before, Uber is a second place. Why Uber is catching this attention? It's one of the most funded, of course, as much as 262 companies. And our world has these issues with this image. For example, we can see that in France it has a high controversy, or also in Spain, because it was banned. So yeah, we're talking about Uber. Uber has problems, but sharing economy is good. Actually, Europe is trying to make a law and prevent this ban of sharing economy companies that are getting very big. You can see the document here. And Also because we saw this big growth of economy and business. We see all these companies of services, transportation, all on time, like at the beginning there were only goods. eBay was one of the first companies of sharing economy. But yeah, so Uber are not only sharing companies, there's an entire world of startups here. You can be the demand or the supply, you can be whatever you want. You just need something, you just ask for it. Or you can borrow something and just write on internet. Like, there you go. Are you ready for this growing economic model?
Yeah.
Sure.
Sure. So, for example, you need something or you can borrow something.
I can do something.
Okay. What can you
do? I can swap.
That's what?
Not my home.
You can go in house surgery and see that you can swap your home. So the sharing economy is a big evolving model. If you want to know more, just go to our show website and check it. Thank you.
Comments, questions for the last group?
Well, meanwhile, I have a question.
You have a question?
So actually, during these 4 months, you did a lot of stuff, different stuff, and actually, probably with this website, we are looking at the 1% of what you have done during this course. And well, I want just to ask you, in your opinion, which has been the most difficult part in your exploration, in your research?
I found as the most difficult part, the first part, where we have to find official data because the sharing economy is still growing and there's no real official provider who can provide official data. We have found 2 different. One is Jeremiah Yang. That is one of the most important persons talking about sharing economy. And we also had the chance to talk with Marco Ranieri, who is the most important person talking about sharing economy in Italy. And this helps a lot, but I think that this was the most difficult part. Try to find reliable data from official providers.
Thank you.
Also, we found the controversy that is, yes, Uber is a big controversy, but it's also sharing economy. So we don't want to say Uber is bad, Uber is good, but yeah, it has controversies.
Thank you.
So, I have a couple of questions. One is, like where we are now, is essentially a way to either share or find services through the model of sharing economy. But then the Uber part is I guess exemplifying, something in the sharing economy, a very controversial business and a very aggressive model. And I guess this is only 1% of what they've done. But in some ways it feels a little bit like maybe different parts of the project that could also be standalone projects. So with the Uber case, one of the things that I was also thinking about is, did you experiment or think about maybe you would like to take Uber and then lots of similar ride sharing or taxi type apps and businesses, because of course Uber was only the beginning, and now there's going to be, as you said, there are a lot of controversies, a lot of different reasons for that. But also the more traditional taxi services are pushing back on this. And so, I mean, in the UK, I take a lot of black cabs, and I've really noticed that these taxi drivers are like, so, you know, when I don't ride, if you sign up to our app, then you can get 10% off. And so what's really interesting is to kind of try to think about sharing economy also in terms of how, because you're from our business models, how it's disrupting and how you could use data visualization or information design to try and map that, right? So now you focus very specifically on Uber, and I guess the question is, was that because in the end that was a trade-off, or did you at various points think Uber is one and we would like to look at a lot of companies that are very similar, because this part of your project is really mapping much more. So I was just wondering why you stuck only with Uber, because that, I mean, that's one of really nice. There's so many similar ones out there now. Nobody wants to answer.
Look at each other.
But maybe it's about trade-offs. That's it. It's like
we wanted to make a comparison between Uber and taxis and all the other transportation options. It was getting really big, also because it was in Italy half banned, like Uber Black is here, but Uber Pop is not here. So it was difficult with all the other languages. We only had to take on English-speaking countries. So we decided just to be more global and generic.
Paolo, do you have questions?
I have a question.
As always, speaking on behalf of designer. Well, the question is, still says, I am not necessarily on the side of all Uber protests, as some taxi drivers seem to simply want to protect their monopoly benefits. But I wonder if there might be implicit disadvantages for us as a society, as we seem to give up some of the hard fought for employees' rights. In this context, my question is, were you able to find some critical views on the side of the users of these services? Were you able to find some critical views, critics from critical issues raised by users, as opposed to taxi drivers or policymakers? So are users protesting in some areas, some countries about these services? Or users are always happy about it?
So we started also with Facebook marking of comments on Uber page. And we didn't put in our research because it was not what we wanted to talk about. But in that case, we saw that users were less angry about the law and the regulation. They were more complaining about safety and the service in general. So like in the first website, so like one of the
But don't go too fast for our network, please.
okay, legality was the first one. Then safety, quality, service, and price. So yeah, legality, there were users talking. There were drivers, users talking about legality, but all the others were talking about safety, quality, and service.
I think Tim was more more talking about users in the sense of people asking for rides, so not users in the sense that you have a car to share.
No, users that use the app.
Okay, yeah, okay. Thank you. So it's done, really?
Yeah.
On 13 minutes late, that's incredible. So we take a short break and then we leave the floor to both Farida's and to Nago for their lectures. And so please stand around here and it will be quite an interesting opportunity to
have a look to the corner of
yeah, for those who don't, you can have a look at the corners with all the projects and info poesia, that's their favorite area. And so, okay, then 15 minutes we start with our lectures. Thank you.
So I can see my machine at 5. I'll plug it in.
Yeah.
And then I'll.
Yeah, you can use it, and well, if you need the power.
Yeah, I put it.
Okay, great. Thank you, Farida.
No, it's fantastic. I'm really pleased to be here and that's really nice here as well.
Yeah, you already know her.
Sure, yeah. First time I was in Milan, right?
I remember I was.
So we stayed in touch since we've known each other. I think sometimes when you meet someone and you know, okay, it's sort of the same ethos, the same feeling, something will happen.
It's good.
Yes, no, you said, yes. Yes, that would be really
Sì, ma col si fa.
Ciao.
So we
start with the second part of the afternoon with presentations from the lectures from Violet and Tim Pablo. Everybody's here? Yeah. Okay. Maria, I leave to you the introduction so you can introduce yourself and then start straight with the lecture. Okay? Microphone is on. I think so, but
Yeah.
the acoustic is not so good.
Okay. Okay, well, I'm through this. Thank you very much for the invitation, Paolo and everybody from Density. I met Paolo and Serena Donna, who's just left, and Georgia actually, who is an early publisher of Density. 4 years ago, I went to an event that Serena had organized. And I met Paolo and I met someone who became involved in Visual Social Media Lab. And basically all the people who I met that day on the panel, I stayed in touch with. And I think Density is a really, really special place. And I think the Andy Kirk tweet that you highlighted, I think really captures a lot of that. So I'm very happy to be here. And I'm very excited to talk about something that is very close to what we do in Visual Social Media Lab, which really tries to deal with the complexity that Paola talked about, and essentially, all the projects that you presented, which I was really very, very impressed with. I think there's a lot of really rich and very exciting stuff there. So what I try to do with my presentation is try and, I guess, respond a little bit to some of the issues that I've been discussing with some of you over the last few months, but also I think in response to some of what you've presented today. So one of the things that I guess want to talk about quite extensively is a project that we are developing at the moment in the lab around social media technology and the refugee crisis. So obviously some of you have presented on this already. I agree with many of the things that have been said so far. And I would like to open it up a little bit further to, I guess, think about some things that we've really struggled with. And so we wrote a report that the second group also talked about, the image of Adam Kirby. We made a different choice. We chose not to show the image. And I can talk a lot about the ethics of that. This is a 3-year-old dead child, and we felt very strongly that we were really not in a position to re-victimize him by reshowing that image. And I think when we talk about the refugee crisis and when we think about the images that are circulated, I think there are really very tricky ethical questions about the reuse and the reshowing of those images. And so we chose not to show any images of dead children. And Density actually made a similar decision. They put a filter over the image to basically flag up, this is a very problematic image for a lot of different reasons. So the image that we talk about a lot actually in the report, and I've brought some copies of the introduction if people want to see what we wrote about, is we went a different route. We chose to trigger an emotional response, even though that wasn't our initial objective, but that's what happened. When we wanted to understand how had this image been talked about on social media, just in terms of volume, because the co-founder of the lab, Francesca D'Orazio, we ended up having this discussion about, something's happening here with this image. There's this huge volume of discussion around it. And so at a very, very, very basic level, we wanted to understand, well, what are the kind of key terms that people are using? And what we noticed is that there was a real switch around early September, and again, some of the groups who already presented also mentioned this, in terms of the way in which people have moved away from using the term migrant to starting to use the term refugee. And what we chose to start to think about and also send out in the world is this visualization, which in many ways is very, very simple. I mean, there's nothing, particularly technically challenging about it. But what we were not prepared for was the really big emotional response that people had to this image, right? That everybody knew what that spike was. And I wasn't prepared that everybody knew that and everybody was familiar with the image. So it made me think a lot about discussions that are now, I think, getting quite well developed around the emotive potential of data visualization and the responsibilities and the potential to trigger responses through data visualization. So I want to talk a little bit more about that as the presentation goes on. So what I would like to talk about mainly is, I want to get back to the report itself, but I want to do that in a roundabout way because I think what I want to try and explain is how we ended up being able to respond in this kind of rapid response mode. Right, so this image, we became familiar with it effectively on the 3rd of September. I mean, the incident that killed Alan and his brother and his mother happened on the 2nd of September. And it's also important to flag up here that his name is not Alan. His name is Alan. The internet got it wrong. We all got it wrong. So we are misremembering a 3-year-old, a dead 3-year-old's name by continuing to call him Alan. His name is Adam. And so we also struggled with that in the report, and this is why we flagged up. We're aware that that's not his real name. We are aware that Alan came into being online through early misrecognition. So there's a number of really significant issues, I think, there as well. So what we ended up doing is we got 15 different groups of people or individuals together to write a response to this single image. They were art historians, but they were also Google News Lab, right? Someone who became involved in the Summer Rogers. And what I would like to, I guess, move into now is how we end up being able to do that very quickly and put out a report in mid-December. And then I want to tell you a little bit about what we found. So one of the key things about me, and I guess that's why I said, I had the introduction over to you, is that I like to try and work across sectors. So I think it's great, and also not so great. But I think where there's real potential for innovation is across different disciplines, across sectors, working with industry, working with policymakers in a space that is incredibly complex, it is incredibly fast-moving, and just to recognize that no single discipline or no single sector has to drop on this in terms of being able to interface fast enough or understand this really complex world fast enough. And so I think what you have to start to build is bridges, and you have to start finding ways to talk to each other in a respectful way and not say, my code is better than yours, or my methods are better than yours, but actually try to work together. And that's really, really tough, and it's a big challenge. So one space that I do that is with the World Economic Forum. I sit on this council called the Global Agenda Council on Social Media, and that, of course, for those of you who are familiar with the World Economic Forum, they have their annual event in Davos. They just had one last month, and so that's sort of stakeholders at a really big global level, CEOs, typical leaders, and that's a very interesting space to operate in. And I also work with industry through an organization called the Big Water Initiative, and they came out of a company called NIP got bought by Twitter in 2014. And so it's big companies that are interested in social data. So think Twitter, Coca-Cola, IBM, Bitly, all of these kind of big players, all of the analytics companies, Brandwatch, and so on, are all organized in this new industry body called the Big Water Initiative. And I also sit on the board of directors as the only person from Europe and the only academic, which is very interesting because industry there speaks very freely about the potential of this data and what they're going to do with it, and how they're going to track you everywhere you go. And it's very, very interesting to be able to understand what's happening in that space as well. So just very briefly back to the World Economic Forum. this is a white paper that we launched at Davos last month. And one of the things that I think is important maybe to pull out here is to just highlight the complexity that we're dealing with now when we're talking about the space. So Otto was already highlighted the complexity that you've been encouraged to think through. And this is also something that we try to capture in this white paper, is how do you now capture a digital world where we have Uber, where we have all of this online activity, where we have these platforms that have really developed in such a way that we can no longer simply think of Facebook as a social network, right? What Facebook is doing in India, for example, in terms of trying to ring-fence the internet, in terms of net neutrality, a lot of what these companies started out being, they are no longer that. And that means that when we think about the data that they are encouraging us to share and everything that we're doing in and through these companies needs a different, wider thesis, right? So what we need to start thinking about is what is the situation now when you have companies that started off as social network sites, then became publishers, saying, it's articles on Facebook, and are now becoming portals to services for citizens like WeChat, or are becoming de facto the internet for first-time users, or a way to get people in a very ring-fenced internet, under Facebook. These are colossal issues to deal with. This is kind of the stuff about, what kind of society do we want to live in. So this is the thesis that we put forward in the white paper, but it really informs a lot of the work that we do in the Visual Social Media Lab as well. So the other point that I guess is sort of useful to highlight is that I've been teaching this stuff for the last 4 or 5 years. The last 4 years I've run this module called Research in Social Media. And again, there what you see is a huge shift in terms of interest from students. So we started with about 40 students, and now I have 125. And what you see is that this module had to develop year on year, trying to understand what markets are we sending the students into, what is, what are the skills that a data scientist needs to have, how can I keep innovating with companies, with policy, and so on, to really prepare my students to have the best possible opportunity to find a job after they leave university. And I think that as much as I'm really excited about the learning for learning's sake, I also feel that I have a strong responsibility as an educator to really put my students in a position that means that they can find work after they leave me. And I think that's very much in line with what is happening here. So last year, or 2 years ago now, we set up the Visual Social Media Lab. So I'm the director of this lab. And the reason that we set this up is because for years, we, as a group of individual researchers, have become very, very interested in what is happening in this technology space in terms of image sharing, right? So instead of saying we're interested in full social media data, or we're interested in particular types of platforms, we said, no, actually what we are really, really interested in is why are we now sharing nearly 2 billion images every single day across different platforms and apps? What is going on there, right? So this is a coming together of technology. We all have smartphones now. We can share images very, very easily. The way in which industry has responded to this, if you think about, platforms like Pinterest, Instagram, Meerkat, Periscope, and so on, we are Snapchat, obviously. There has been a shift through technological development in terms of how these companies are responding by developing image-centric platforms, right? And that is a really, really significant shift. So you have this kind of perfect storm of the ability to share everything that we do in visual form. Now, that makes it a really, really tricky thing to deal with. And one of the first projects the first project that launched the lab effectively is trying to understand what this means for the social. What does that mean for, for different kinds of ways of thinking about society? So this is a project called Picturing the Social, transforming our understanding of images in social media and big data research. So what we're fundamentally trying to understand there is what is going on, right? I mean, it's kind of as simple as that, and it's as hard as that. Because this is a massive challenge, and this is the only goal I can show you, but that, often I feel like that. So, who is in my software team? Okay. This is my team, and I think what's very important to highlight here is that this is really rich in diversity, and very knowingly so. So this is very rich in diversity in terms of different disciplines who are involved, different people at different career stages, different opinions, but we also work very closely with industry. Because one of the things that we realized is that in terms of innovation, industry really is very, very far advanced in terms of analytics and in terms of being able to get access to data. So think about the difference between the open API system or scraping data or having Firehose straight up Firehose access. These were choices that we made, and I can absolutely talk more about it, but this is what we wanted to see, essentially what is possible if you put together social scientists, computer scientists, arts and humanities, and the resources of industry. That's the experiment. So what we ended up doing is we ended up kind of picking those different disciplines, those kind of ingredients that we felt were needed to very seriously deal with images, right? So one of the things that I think often happens when people work with images on social media is that they don't necessarily come from backgrounds that really set you up well to deal with unusual cultures, right? So one of the things that we felt that was very important is to recognize those disciplines that are very, very good at dealing with images. And they didn't necessarily have to be disciplines that are also good at dealing with social media, but we wanted to work with those disciplines that really have been thinking about the visual for a really long time. So it didn't take us very long to kind of go to art history, visual culture, and so on. So we have 3 art historians as part of the lab. And also now it's very interesting, I think, kind of cross-fertilized experimental PhDs. So we have one PhD in the lab by Ray, who is looking at what is the possibility for computational methods informed by iconography, right? So this is algorithmic iconography. We have another PhD who is working with the Food Standards Agency to try and understand food safety issues from the perspective of the Food Standards Agency, but trying to think, how can the Food Standards Agency know and inform their policies by looking at the images that we share for our food consumption, for example, on Instagram. Right? These are really massive challenges for government departments to deal with because they don't really have the resources. So we are particularly attracted to these kinds of projects. So this might sound like a kind of dumb question, what's a social media image or what's a Twitter image? We find it really, really hard to define because of the affordances of these different platforms. And this is what I mean when I say, when you approach it from a visual cultural perspective and you think about mediality, the image becomes really, really hard to pin down. Is it simply a digital image, right? Because I think there's an assumption that most social media images are shared in real time and are images that have been taken by the uploader and are shared, from a mobile phone. Now, what we are trying to think through is what happens if someone takes an old analog image from an old shoebox, scans it, turns it into a JPEG, puts it on Twitter. What does that become? Is that a Twitter image? So what is the affordance of the platform that allows it to be turned into a Twitter image? And that is really, really complicated, I think. And I don't think we really know. The other thing that I think is really tricky to deal with when you deal with images, and I guess by now you should realize I like to make my life very hard. I'm also always thinking about, what is the context around an image, right? So when you scrape or when you take from the API, what do you have access to and what do you not have access to, right? So how does this thing look in the feed? And how does this thing look in your data set? Or how does this thing look when you scrape it? And what are the choices, what are the trade-offs that you make when you choose not to collect, for example, what on Twitter you could say are the comments on the image, right? So if you think about how the image is situated in the feed, and there might be underneath lots and lots of discussions happening, the way in which the Twitter API treats essentially what on YouTube would just be called comments, they are treated as individual unique tweets, which means that they do not belong to that unique image that you're interested in. I think that's a disaster, because what that means is that it's actually really difficult to computationally collect the context around the image that you're interested in. Right? Those are the questions I'm interested in. Right? So where are the trade-offs and where is the structural decision-making on the part, in this case, of Twitter, that they chose, instead of calling those things comments, which is what Facebook calls them, which is what YouTube calls them, why are these individual unique tweets? Those are the things that, those are kind of nerdy questions that keep me up at night, and I try to get these platforms over. So what it means then is that when you start from the vantage point of visual culture, it becomes very difficult then to think about methods and to think about interdisciplinary methods, because what we're trying to do is really treat images as images. And that becomes really challenging. Then, for example, and this is the criterion that we built, and this took us about a month to build, and there were many disagreements and many tiers. What are the different types that we can identify in a data set of different types of images, right? Because on the one hand, you can make it out really easy and say, oh, there are photographs. But actually, when you have a data set of randomly selected images, or even if selected around an event, and you start to look really closely at what you actually have, it's almost like intuitively you wish you hadn't looked. Because then things become really, really difficult. Are they simply photographs, or what kind of photographs are they? Are they screenshots? What does trying to pin down type tell you, for example, about different practices, right? So how can you, through identifying different types of content, different types of images, get at the really, really complex sharing practices on social media? In this case, only Twitter, right? Because maybe it doesn't matter that someone shared a still from a TV program. Does it matter if someone shares a screenshot from, the news? What kind of image is that? What kind of image? How is a screenshot different? How is the image of text different? All of these things matter because we all call them images, right? So I think what becomes very tricky is when we talk about social media images, often the assumption is that we're talking about photographs. And that's not what most people end up sharing. Absolutely, those are photographs, but they're not necessarily straightforward photographs. They're not necessarily photographs shared in real time from a net. Really difficult when you want to deal with online images. That you have to deal with levels of technological disruption that are really difficult to comprehend if you want to take that seriously. Right? If you want to take seriously the devices, all of this other stuff, the APIs, and so on. So what we're trying to essentially do is the bottom bit. Instead of, and I can say many, many things about the way in which certain research groups are focused very much on the medium side. So Digital Methods Initiative in Amsterdam, for example, has been a lot on medium specificity in developing digital methods. Right? So everything there is about the medium. So what we are interested in is both the medium and the message, but actually going beyond that is really what we call structured users and content. And specifically what we mean by structures is the companies, the algorithms, the APIs, the feature changes, the political economy, right? How do you take that into account when you then want to think about a piece of content and also the way in which users respond, right? These are holistic feedback loops that mean when Facebook bought Instagram and then became super hot, and then Twitter became super hostile to Instagram, you could no longer directly show Instagram images in the Twitter feed. That's the kind of tricky stuff that I'm talking about. And then users respond to that by developing if this and that recipes to subvert the structure to still be able to show that Instagram image in the Twitter feed. That's why I think you should study this as a very complex ecosystem where users end up responding in different ways to still show the content in the way that they want, even if the structure has changed. And the structure often has changed because of bit of economy considerations, because companies buy other companies, and that has a knock-on effect on, algorithmic structures or APIs or how you can show things in the feed. So, we think images are difficult to study for all of those different reasons. They, on the one hand, have a hypervisibility, but when you see them in a data set, they're often linked, right? So they're both on the one hand hypervisible, but invisible in data sets, and you have to make extra effort to make them more visible. They move offline, right? So there's also this movement of images from the online, across the online, but from the online to the offline, right? People print things out, people hold up photographs that they found on Twitter and so on. They're often invisible in a lot of tools, because tools are not really designed to deal with images, right? This is a massive issue. They're often very difficult to get hold of, to download legally, right? So there's a massive issue around, do you scrape them, do you use the APIs? If the API is not available, or if Instagram has again chosen to change the API, or Pinterest has no API, all of these things make them difficult to actually get hold of for your research. Then they become really, really hard to read and interpret. And this is where I want to move, because they present a really massive research challenge. So what I want to move into now is this report that we wrote between September and December in terms of this iconic image. I think all of us have seen the image, especially the groups that have been working on the refugee crisis who will be very familiar with this image fine and pretty. But for the purposes of trying to now move into how did we deal with the complexity, how did we deal with doing interdisciplinarity, how did we deal with doing that across sectors, from the perspective of a starting point in brand and visual culture, this is what we ended up doing. So this is we call the report the iconic image on social media, because I think this will be one of the images, I think, in recent history that we will be talking about for a very long time, for lots of different reasons that I will spend a little bit of time talking about. Now, one of the things that I think is really interesting and important to highlight is my co-editor, Olga Gorjanova, who really summarized quite nicely why would a bunch of academics try and do anything in rapid response mode, right? This is not a natural mode of working. We are very much encouraged to do things very slowly and then put, our research behind paywalls so that nobody can ever find it and nobody wants to read it. Why would you put yourself out there and do something out in the public domain and try to be part of public conversation? And I think it goes to the heart of what we think we're doing in the lab, is because A, we can, and B, we feel that we have a social responsibility to do a particular kind of research, right? So it's very much, we want to think that our research matters. And I know that sounds kind of, semi-flirty, quite vicious, and maybe completely naive, but that's how we feel. So, the data. What we ended up working with is nearly 3 million posts that we collected through our commercial partner, Pulsar. And then we also ended up working with Google News Lab, and then, when you can have data at the level of Google, we also threw into the mix more than 3 billion search queries a day. And when I say we threw that into the mix, obviously none of us have access to this data apart from Google. But through working with Simon, we were able to give a much wider framework that expanded our scope beyond the, I would say, echo chamber of social media, but also to see how this image hadn't just moved across social media, but also how people were searching about this boy and this image. So the report is 75 pages long. It's quite hefty. And we've got the introduction here if you want to read it, but it's available on our website. So in terms of questions, in terms of what did we think we were doing or why were we doing this, what we were particularly interested in was why had this image of this child gone viral, right? Why is it this image? And why had the response been so big? Because it wasn't the first time that a child died or that dead refugees or migrants were washing up on the shores of Europe. So why now? Why care now, right? What was it about this particular image? Because, and this is again already something that one of the groups highlighted, this image, and this is also how the media responded to our report, this is how the image was framed, right? That this image had changed something, that this image was different, that this image had changed the debate on immigration. And really quite to our surprise, because we're a little bit in the mindset of, peer-reviewed journals, also nobody reads, we were really stunned about how much coverage there was of the report in the mainstream media, but it really got picked up very, very widely. And then we were also very, I think, encouraged by all of these different stakeholder communities who were really interested in what our interdisciplinary report showed in terms of possibilities. So I've been giving a lot of these talks recently, but I was very interested in the interest, for example, from Mac Photo in New York, because of course, Mac photographers, they do iconic press images. We're very familiar with those images. So I was very interested that they were keen to understand, what we were doing. The International Journalism Festival in Perugia has already been mentioned, so I have a panel there. But the panel there includes UNHCR and BuzzFeed. So they're very, very interesting partners who have approached us in different ways. And also, I already mentioned what before. So what I want to say a little bit about now is when you choose to look at only one image, you also have to make decisions. You also have to think about what is the time frame, how much data do we put in. So we looked at the first 2 weeks from the point that the image went online to 2 weeks after. But of course, and this is informed by W.J.T. Mitchell, this image has a life, right? And it has an afterlife. And it's not just in those 2 weeks in the immediate response that this image is made significant or is doing work. Because what I think is very interesting to think about is how is this image continuing to do work and continuing to circulate and in different ways, right? So this is Alan's father, Abdullah, who, of course, he lost his son, but he is also haunted by how this image is circulating online. And there's some really interesting reports, and they're very tough to read, where he's showing the kinds of memes that people are producing about his dead son. And he's showing, right, so this is for me a very confrontational image that you have here, this surviving family member showing on his smartphone how people like Assad are pretending to take selfies with Alan in the background, right? So there's the afterlife at the level of the individual. This is someone's son who died, right? There's a Charlie Hebdo scandal, right? Where Charlie Hebdo in January decided in response to the instance in Cologne over New Year to suggest what Alan would have grown up into if he had not died, right? So what they're basically saying is that this child would have grown up to be a broker, and he would basically go around and harassing women, right? So there's also the way in which this image continues to be used in different ways. Artists, Ai Weiwei, never misses a trick, decided to pretend to be Alan and lie dead on the beach for one of his recent kind of artworks. And this really triggered a very negative response, and I think maybe got a little bit wrong here in terms of what he was doing. But what is I think interesting is his ongoing visual motif that is being used. So in terms of a little bit of a drill down into what we collected. So, and if people are interested, I can talk more about, it took me a really long time to build this query. But this is our query, and we only, essentially the main social media platform we looked at was Twitter. We could have looked at Facebook, but the issue with Facebook is you can't get all the historical data. So even though they have the Python API, which is not cheap, but even if you have access to it, it's not historical, you can't go back in time. So there's all of these restrictions that I think we don't talk about enough when we say, oh, we ended up using, we ended up searching that platform. I think the reason why we ended up searching Twitter so much is because A, it has a very open API ecosystem, but also you can do storage, right? So you can go back in time, and you can't do that with any other platform. So there's an issue there. Now, we also, when we published this report, had a statement on ethics, which I don't think we talked about yet today. And particularly in terms of, A, was it okay for us to collect this data? And B, when we then visualize that data, what are our ethical responsibilities in terms of showing connections, and how do we show, and who do we show? And so we wrote about that as well. So essentially, what the report looks at, through these 15 contributions, is how did it spread on social media? What was the political response in terms of civic and mainstream politicians? How can iconography be made useful to think about this image, right? To think about this virality, to think about the spread, but also what were the emotive responses to this image? And what is the role of ethics? Now, before I drill into the social media spread side of it, I just want to give you a couple of examples where it becomes really important to realize that a lot of social media images are not photographs, right? This image triggered a huge response from artists around the world who wanted to respond by either placing Aylan back in a domestic setting to say he should have been asleep in his bed instead of dead, or they wanted to blame political leaders, right? And political leaders mean leaders in the Arab world, but also European leaders. So this is, one of many variations where different political leaders are blamed. Another motif that we write about a lot is the Pietà, right? The image where Alan is picked up by the Turkish police officer. This is an image that resonates through centuries of Christian iconography. It's this image, right? We're very familiar with this image, which means that we can read it in a particular way. It's a particular kind of image of suffering. But what becomes very tricky is when that Pietà motif is disrupted, and all of a sudden Alan ends up in the arms of Saddam Hussein, right? So this is one of the images that Simon Faulkner writes about. We have to be very careful not to present an approach when we deal with this material because of the ways in which we are dealing with a global Twitter population that may have very different responses and sensibilities to what we are used to in terms of visual cultures. And I think this is a really good example. And essentially what this says in Arabic is, it's Saddam saying, if I had still been alive, this would not have happened to you. Right? That's pretty big claim to make here. But it's very interesting to kind of think through how rich and how complex this visual culture is when you start looking beyond photographs, but also when you start to take seriously all of this regional variation. So to then wrap up in terms of the spread. So what Francesco did in the first chapter is he did this kind of forensic analysis to see how quickly did the mainstream media pick up on this image, right? So what we know is that this is a photojournalist who took a photograph and started to spread it in a very traditional way, put it on a wire, Turkish news agency, then it moved to another Turkish news agency. But Twitter didn't do anything for the first few hours, and the mainstream media didn't do anything for the first few hours. So what we're interested in is what happens when Liz Sly at the Washington Post, who is the bureau chief in Beirut, what happens in terms of the diffusion and engagement to that image a few hours after it had gone on the wire. And this is what happens. So this will be a kind of visualization you're very familiar with. But when you do that kind of forensic tracking of where's the key node and who was that key node, I think it's very significant and interesting that it was a journalist who was in the region and who clearly was a highly respected source, and then all of a sudden the mainstream media starts to really pick up on it. But what is important is when you look at it differently, so there's this slide quite early on, is that all of these journalists, and this is what Francesca writes about as well, all of these journalists are tweeting about this image in a personal capacity on their own Twitter feeds, right? So there is a period of about 4 or 5 hours where the image is spreading like wildfire on Twitter, but nobody is writing newspaper articles about it yet. And so what is really interesting in terms of thinking about the ecosystem in which all of this information flows and spreads is the way in which Twitter was able to be a catalyst to make this image go global, go viral and global before the mainstream media started writing stories about it. And it's this really interesting symbiotic relationship between the affordances of the platform, journalists who understand how to mobilize it, and then to see how long it took the mainstream media to then start writing the stories, right? So what is really interesting when you have people who can do this is you can very convincingly show why Twitter was an important catalyst and how it then moved into the mainstream. So the final piece that I'll talk about in my last 2 minutes, thank you for not sharing about that, is what Simon Rogers did with Google data. So what I think is interesting is, I mean, you know, Simon is of course here very much promoting the power of Google. We can debate that as well. But what I think is interesting is what he says here is that Google is the world's biggest publicly available journalistic data set. And in this case, it shows how the world was desperate to find out more about Ilan, what happened to him, and what forced his family to flee their home, right? So what I think is really interesting about working with Google directly is to be able to do that same kind of forensic analysis in terms of tracking across time and almost like minute by minute what were people doing in Google search, and actually to realize that people were searching for this kid already before Twitter, before it started to go really viral on Twitter. And also what they were searching for, because early search terms were just things like Syrian boy. So people had heard something had happened, they didn't know his name, but they were searching for what had happened. And then, of course, you can contextualize this by kind of thinking, well, what else did people search for, right? So they searched for the photograph, they searched for the story. Now, similar to what we have found on Twitter, there's that spike again. And this is in Google Trends data, and some of the groups presented Google Trends data to show the shift from talking about migrants to refugees, right? And actually what Simon was able to tell us, that September saw the highest ever global search volume for the topic of refugees in Google search history. This was huge. That photograph triggered that, right? So it's one thing to say what happened on Twitter, but to recognize what happened to this image in a global setting through Google search, I think is really, really interesting. Because then you also have this kind of contextual data, right? In terms of what were the top questions that people were asking about Adam Curry, what happened to him, what is causing the migrant crisis, and so on. But also country-specific questions, right? What were people asking in the United States? Number one, why people migrated to Europe? What is the European migration crisis? Why are Syrians migrating to Europe, right? Different kinds of questions in Germany. Second question, how can I help? Right? How can I volunteer to help? Izzy, what's the book's opinion on this? Right? Question number 5, people are interested in Italy. What the Pope really called, has the Pope really called for Catholics to take in a migrant family? Right? So what, and I can say much more about these questions, but what I think is interesting when you also can drill down into country-specific questions that people are asking is that Google, as far as I'm concerned, becomes almost like a research question generator, because it starts to give you kind of flavors of country-specific concerns and topics. And also, one thing that I think the second group mentioned is the fingerprinting, right? When people come to Italy, question number 4 is, will Germany accept migrants who have different fingerprints in Italy for now? Right? So these are questions that I would not have come up with, but these are concerns that people have clearly because of the ways in which people are documented through these journeys. Now, wrapping up, in terms of the Google Trends API data, of course it's fantastic that we were able to work with Google, but of course my question would be, were these really the top 5 questions that people are interested in? How does this Trends API work? I mean, it's really great that you want to work with us in this way, but for these country-specific results, how does your API work? And this is, back and forth that we're having, but I think those kinds of questions are really, really important to understand. Like, were they the top 5 results, or were these results in like the 100 most searched for questions and they were handpicked, right? That's kind of significant, because if these were not the top 5, then why is maybe the question about code, why that is interesting to report on, because it's, have a sexy result. But all of these things, how these APIs work, is really, really important. So finally then, some of the key concerns, and I think this has already come up through some of the presentations, but these are the things we're struggling with as we move forward with this research, is one, how to deal with visualizing data that's already visual, right? So one way now that is available is direct visualization of how to think through what does that mean, what are the issues with that. A very big question about the role of images in the refugee crisis. The group that presented already, I think, has convincingly shown why images really matter to think about, but also, I think, the role of data visualization in the refugee crisis. And I will give you an example why I'm a bit concerned about this. Particularly, how they can work to have an effective impact, or can be problematic, right? And then also the different ethical dilemmas. So the one that I mentioned, which is the one we produced, we were surprised that people had an emotional response to this visualization, right? Now the one that I had an emotional response to is this one by this guy, who I think they're based in Switzerland. Again, used the same data that some of the groups here work with, but the visualization that they built, and it's an interactive, and you can have a look at it via their website, which they call the flow towards Europe. And when you have a look at it, what you see is basically hordes of data points, swarming towards Europe. So my question here is, what are some questions maybe we have to ask ourselves about the responsible role when we visualize this data in terms of what that can then be used for potentially, right? Because in some ways, I don't think this is necessarily that different from showing hordes of people on the move in the countryside, or hordes of people crossing bridges, right? So this is a kind of open-ended question, a rhetorical question, I think, specifically for a audience like this, is how do we deal with this, right? If you have this data available, what kinds of things do you need to do about the responsible role of what you put out there in the world, and also in terms of re-showing some of these images, right? So we made the choice not to do that, and we can talk about that. And if people want to read the whole report, thank you.
Thank you. So, a couple of minutes to set up Team Nigel.
John?
Questions during the peer.
Yeah, during the peer, very good.
It's a Dixie.
There's a way to download the report. The report is downloadable.
Yeah, the report is just on the website. You go on the website and it's there. Open access.
All right. Hi there. Can you hear me? Hello, hello, hello. All right. So I can't hear you. It's still muted. Ah, yes.
A moment.
Sure.
Hello, Till. Can you hear me?
Can you hear you? Yep, I do. You hear me? Give me, wait a second. Well, I can't hear you. No, I see. Well, why not? It's still muted. Ah, yes. Yes, now?
A moment.
Sure.
Hello, Till. Can you hear me?
Yes, I do. Can you hear me? Yep, I do. You hear me? Okay. So, can you hear me? I didn't get that completely. Yes, okay. All right, can anyone give me another sign if I'm audible? Can you hear me? I didn't get it completely because the mic is still out, still muted on your side. Okay.
Till?
Yeah.
Okay. We managed to put you on the beamer.
Okay.
So.
Right. Okay, let me just check once again the presenter view. You see that?
Okay, try with the presentation.
Second. Right.
Okay.
Okay, perfect. So let me know. So do we start now or shall we still wait?
Sorry?
Shall I start or?
Yeah, please.
Oh, I'm very sorry. Great. Okay, so.
Thank you.
All right, perfect. All right, so. All right, so I guess I'm visible again. All right.
Okay, you're online, you can start.
Yes, I tried to, sorry for a second. Okay. I'm still waiting for my own image. All right, okay, sorry. Okay, take some time.
So now you can see us.
Yes, okay, so, well, sorry for the hassle here. Okay, so I'm Till Nagel from the Urban Complexity Lab in Potsdam, and similar to what Paolo said in the beginning, we try to untangle urban complexity through data visualization. And yep, as you've heard, and as you can see, I'm not with you in person today, for which I'm very sorry. And I was foolish enough to think I could simply just add a couple of minutes to my normal timing and still catch my plane. But because of these things, yep, I could not do that. So let's do it remotely. First of all, let me say that I was very impressed with your project and that I mostly or very much liked your approach of investigating the domain from all these different perspectives and try to understand all the domain through visualizations. And I think that was really great to see, and also the range of experiments you were doing. And about this topic of data visualization as a product and a process, I'm also trying to talk a bit about. So let me start the screen sharing again. And okay, I hope you still can hear me. So, all right. So yeah, I'm going to talk a bit about the process of designing visualizations, and for this I'm using the image of a meandering river, and how this river flows through its valley over time, how it creates this meandering pattern, how it finds its way down to the sea. And as you can see, this results in some kind of a snaking pattern as the streams meanders back and forth, and how it leaves behind some kind of little islands, or how you can still see previous side arms and so on. And this, of course, is often not true in the perfect view of the linear visualization process, where you have in the beginning often a specific question or hypothesis you want to investigate, where you have data sets often available already, and you try to make it machine readable, then you filter it, you select the one perfect graphical representation, and in the end offer that to the user. And as we all know, this is often not the case in the real world. So this is much more how it looks like. You have all this kind of chaos in the beginning. You try to untangle the complexity. You try to shine some light into the complexity of the problem in the beginning. So you first have to investigate yourself. You talk to the experts. You create some kind of visualizations and so on. And after a while, the concept becomes clearer, and you you select and you refine and you talk to your users and so on, and settle on a design. And of course, there's not only one meandering way, but there are plenty of those. And over time, over decades and over centuries, then all these kind of different ways and paths have been created. And in the following, 25-30 minutes, I'm going to show you 4 visualization projects, all designed with different data sets and within very different contexts, with which I want to highlight these different aspects of my design process, and also how the projects I'm going to show you influence each other. So the very first one is foreign domestics, and this is a bit of a special case because it was for the visualizing.org a global marathon, and I guess some of Density Design also participated, if I remember correctly. Anyway, so the specialty here is, first, it was a marathon, meaning it was only a weekend long, so just from Friday to Sunday, and also that the data they provided. So there was just a fixed data set, very simple CSV files. Here in this specific task, it was about airlines and connections between countries and between airports and so on. And we tried to, or I tried to understand the data myself in the beginning. So here you see a very early visual experiment, rather ugly actually. But what you can see here is in green, incoming airline connections or flight routes, and in red, the outgoing ones from a country, and the blue ones down are domestic flights. And now you can start and look already around, and maybe you find some patterns. Do you see something, what is happening here? Maybe, well, you could see, all right, all the more richer Western countries seem to have much more connections, much more flights. Apparently, some have fewer. There's apparently a relation, of course, between the size of the country and so on. But there are also some kind of maybe more interesting patterns to observe or insights to gather. For example, in Iran, very few international flight routes, but very many domestics. Or the other way around, like in the United Arab Emirates, you have many international flights, but no domestic routes. So this, of course, means this is an important hub for international travel. And if you go on then and do other visualization experiments, for example, this so-called choropleth maps or color grading area map, and you hover with a mouse over the countries, then you see the connections. For example, Spain, of course, many British and German tourists come there for summer, or some kind of historical relations between Algeria and France. And you can also, for example, explore some kind of political relationships like Israel and the Arabic countries, and so on and so on. But then I proceeded and went further and did other visualization experiments. And here was a bit of an unusual way that that these kind of circular style, or this kind of form which emerged here through that experiment, that I liked it a lot. And so I tried going with that and did that for a single country. And instead of just showing that on a map and showing all the connections of domestic flights, I even made them simpler and reduced it into this one single glyph. So this is just like the single dots here are the airlines, are the airports, of course, and the lines in between are domestic flights. And if you do that now as a small multiple and create the same thing for all European Union countries, you now can compare and contrast domestic flights of all these countries. And again, there took some iterations, of course, to come to the final result. And now the main idea came into the visual style also, which was coloring the lines based on whether the domestic route was serviced by a foreign airline or a national one. And in the end, this was the result, which also won one of the infographic competitions here. But I like it also as an example because this kind of complexity, and we discussed that already today a couple of times, is this is overall rather complex, but when you investigate some time, some of these kind of interesting insights can emerge. And I also try to help with that by giving some kind of like examples. And I think that is also something which is very useful to do in a visualization, of course, and as you've done also in your course works, that you explain some of the highlights here. Another aspect is, as I said, that was only for a week and this little marathon here. That what I really tried to do was an interactive version where you could then tap or click on those little country glyphs, and then you see this kind of geospatial map and could explore more in detail how that country looks like. But I ran out of time. But maybe this is also something that happens to you from time to time, that then after a while you keep these little experiments and maybe use or reuse those ideas in later projects. So the second project I want to demonstrate today is touching transport, which I've done as I was with the MIT Sensible City Lab. And this is part of a larger research initiative like Singapore, where we try to give people visual and tangible access to all this kind of digital data, all these kind of traces and bits in all the databases in modern cities. So what we try to do in this project is, again, create visualizations, of course, create, as we call it, urban demos. So not only design and develop visualizations, but also then very early bring them to the public, bring them to the stakeholders you're intending to reach in order to gather feedback and in order to understand what they want to learn and how they could do that. So this, touching transport, this project here focuses on the bus network in Singapore, which is an integral part of the public transport system and has over 2 million passengers per day. And here you have to tap in with a smart card, as you probably know, but also you have to tap out for the distance-based fare, even in buses. So you pay exactly how far you go. And as we got that data, we of course also know from where to where the people are riding. Okay, and here again, so in this kind of design process, we had to, of course, understand the data ourselves. We had to try to find out new ways or better aesthetic ways of showing the amount of passengers over different stations. We wanted to understand and investigate how over time this changes. So here now you can see a single bus line, both directions, and boarding and deboarding passengers over the time, and you can already see some kind of temporal patterns. And as I said, we know from where to where people are riding, so we could also do this kind of connection experiment where we wanted to understand how stations or clusters of stations are related to each other. And after a while, and in this kind of design process, we then fine-tune the visualization, also the style, of course, the aesthetics, but also the fluidity of the interaction and so on. And as I mentioned, this was for a large multi-touch tabletop touching transport. And here are now the 3 views we integrated into this application. And now bear with me because I'm trying to start that video. Hopefully you can see it a little bit. All right, so here now we are presenting this visualization, as I said, of bus passengers and bus rides in Singapore, and people can easily explore that on a multi-touch tabletop. And always one selected bus line is shown, so it's a bit reduced, with all the boarding and alighting passengers at each stop, so the single circles here. Users can zoom in and pan to areas they're interested in, for example, their own neighborhood, and tap to get detailed information. And this map view allows comparing urban areas and clusters of bus stops. For example, a dwelling area where more people board a bus in the morning. And you can now compare and display various bus lines. You can also then select different times of the day. You can even adapt the time range to see, for example, just the single half an hour or the whole afternoon or morning and so on. And you can also compare different times at a single glance in this third view. The displays multiple charts all over the day of one bus line. And now this allows you to understand spatial temporal patterns, where, for example, an area of leisure, cinemas or restaurants or something, highlights in the evening because more people are going there. And also in the third view with these arcs here now, this kind of relations all over the city, all over Singapore, becomes more visible. So overall, the 3 visualization modes here facilitate getting different perspectives on the data set, while also the fluid interactivity integrates them into a unified user experience. And together they give people visual and tangible access to information about the public transit networks and enables an understanding of some of the vital dynamics of the city. And also this was a so-called, as we call it, urban demo. So we also showcased that in an exhibition. We invited citizens of Singapore to explore their own city. And we did a couple of user studies and published about that, of course. But one thing, again, as an example here, the design process was that the arc visualization, we integrated the view, was not really completely working. That was also what we learned from our user study. So in a later process, and we published also on that one, is then we extended the typical arc diagram and created the so-called Sankey arcs, where we solved some of the inherent problems of arc diagrams. All right, so the third project is Shanghai Metro Flow. And here we wanted to investigate a bit the notion that accurate geographic representations might not always be perfect to reflect the personal experience of space. And you all, I guess, know this famous map here of Harry Beck. It's from the 1930s, London tube map, or the London Underground system. And this, of course, was invented or designed because of the problem at that time. So the underground system became more complex and became larger, with many stations and lines opening up. And the geographical view, the geographic map, which was existing actually, became also visually very complex. So it became difficult to see how to best ride from station A to station B. And Beck now ingeniously invented this map and straightened the lines and equalized the distances between the stations in order to simplify the goal to find one's way. And we wanted to use this kind of very famous and nowadays very typical or common way of displaying metro maps for Shanghai. And again, here also this was influenced by other projects of ours. So the top one here shows, or is a screenshot, of course, of an animation for Berlin, and the lower one is a distortion of space in London. And here also we had to gather the data ourselves. So we went to the transport website of theirs and had to scrape that, meaning had to get the data from the website and unified or combine that with the geographical information of OpenStreetMap, which is, of course, a fantastic source for spatial data. And again, here we had all these kind of visual experiments. We try to understand what is happening here, how we could tell an interesting story maybe, how in the beginning here now at 6 a.m. in the morning, how the trains start going through one single line here as one single station here. And in that process, so it's not only a design process, at least how I typically approach this, but it's also creating your own tools. I mean, often you can investigate the data with, I don't know, Excel, of course, or with Tableau or some kind of other visualization tools. But I like to create my own ones in order to find novel ways or find insights which might not be very clear using other tools. And for example, here now, you can see very simply, you can see the trains running over the day in Shanghai. And I have all these kind of little self-constructed properties and mechanisms to attune the visualization while I'm looking at it. And for example, here now you see this line where the mouse is, so this top line, and at 10 a.m. in the morning, then suddenly the frequency of the trains are getting lower. And of course, this is a like trivial insight for any public transport planner or for a citizen, but these kind of tools help me to also understand what's happening here. And this was for an exhibition in Shanghai. So we not only created this kind of visualization here with 3 scenes, but also a little poster on the side, which explains some of the aspects of the lines a bit further. And this poster also reflected or was similar to how the lines are shown in the subways. And here now, I hope that is a bit visible via the connection. The process of designing or refining this poster, which took plenty of steps, of course, now to show, for example, all these little icons here, to show a way, to find a way to show interconnectivity between the lines and so on. It always takes some time, and you have to try out lots of things, discuss again with the viewers in the end, and so on and so on. So in the end, then we settled on this poster here, and we had this kind of little legend below. And I want to here now for this talk highlight this line connections in the middle, where you see these like on a 12-hour clock metaphor, the 12 lines existing at that time in 2013, and how a single line then is connected to all these other lines. So you don't know where to transfer, but you know you can transfer directly. And this little graph here was also influenced by these circular icons I created for the foreign domestic, for the very first project showing the flight connections. So sometimes these little ideas can re-emerge then later on in a project. Okay, now let me guide you through the video of the Shanghai Metro flow, where you see in the beginning an overall view of the city. And you see also kind of a geographical view of all the lines. And in the morning now, all these trains are starting to run on the lines. And if we zoom in a bit and focus on a single train, the red highlighted one here, then when we zoom in actually, then we see that all the every time a train reaches a station, this kind of flashes. And this should give some kind of an impression or some kind of indication of activity there. And maybe you see that all those stations flash in unison. I hope that is visible. And we wanted to give an impression of this kind of synchronicity of this timetable data, that how it would look like in the perfect world of a transport planner. And now going back to the geographical view, you see these lines here running. You see also the river. I hope at least you can see the river. So it's a geographical map in the background. And now we morph to the schematic view, similar to the one from the London Tube, as I showed in the beginning. And here we wanted to, as I said, also invite the audience, invite the visitors of the exhibition to think a bit about how these kind of schematic maps might also influence our perception of the city. And this was aimed, of course, for citizens of Shanghai. So they know how to ride the trains. They also know this schematic map view. Right. And so lastly, I wanted to show a very new project, Sea of City Flows, which we designed to help citizens casually analyze 3 bike sharing systems. So this is not completely a sharing economy, but a bit more classic, I guess, but where people, citizens or tourists or other guys in a city can rent a bike, and this is station-based. And we wanted to allow people then to compare different cities. So this was the main goal, that people in an exhibition could compare different bike sharing systems. And again, in the beginning, we did all these kind of very simple, very reduced visualization experiments, showing lines, showing connections between the stations, trying to understand how to better visualize the direction of the rides, understanding maybe how to use color then to create an interactive map where a user can then select a single station and understand its relation to the overall city, and so on, where you also have a timeline to a bit better understand how it differs between the morning or the evening hours and so on. But again, all these kind of visualization experiments are for the design process to understand which kind of ideas might work, which kind of visualizations might already work for the end viewers. And with these kind of things now, we were able to understand also some kind of interesting patterns. For example, now I selected 3 stations in the inner city of Berlin. Kreuzberg, the area, it's more where the young urban people are living. And in the top row, you see 3 stations on a random working Friday. Okay, so there's some kind of activity happening. But on the lower part, you see now this for a special day, for May Day, so 1st of May, where there's a huge street festival in Kreuzberg, in this district in Berlin. And you, of course, can now see a very different behavior, where many more people are coming to these stations in that district and many more leaving than also in the evening. And one little tidbit here was also that one of the stations was closed because like it is in the city, in the direct center of the whole festival. So these kind of little insights you can then explore by creating your own visualizations. But of course, it is also possible if you look into the data, for example, with existing or other tools. Now here's something where we found it more interesting to see the routes people might have taken. So instead of only showing origin destination paths, so from where to where people have been riding, we know that for sure. Now we just assume some bicycle tours, bicycle paths. And this is based on a navigation device from here. And with that, because we like that, even if it might not be true, it gives some kind of better impression where people can relate to in their personal life how they also ride through the city. So we choose to use this kind of route visualization. And here's one then where we preceded that, a bit nicer style, and maybe some of you, this reminds you to some of another density design project. At least I hope so, because again, I was inspired by that. And of course also it means you not only always get inspiration by your own projects, I hope so, but of course you look around, you read papers, you investigate, as I said, you discuss with the experts, but also of course on a design level, you might want to look around. Okay, what we then try to do is, because this is beautiful and you can see kind of overall spatial patterns, so you see the overall trend of the activity of the movement in the city in Berlin. But we wanted to understand how, again, districts connect to each other, relate to each other. And there we then investigated this kind of view. It's a bit more complex, of course. So we have a 3D view, or 2.5D, with a card, with a map in the background, and these clustered edges here, where we try to come up with a way of a bit diminishing or reducing the visual complexity. and still trying to make some sense. And we worked on that for a long time, actually. A couple of weeks with lots and lots of different edge bundling techniques, 3D visualizations, and so on. And well, in the end, it did not work out, at least not with the stories we wanted to tell. But our users liked the 3D view very much, so, well, we kept with that at least. Now, this is one of the views we have now in the final visualization, which we exhibited in Berlin. And we did that, as I said, for 3 cities. So it was New York, London, and Berlin. And the first view we had was like show all the bike rides for a specific time for the whole city, as you can see now, which mostly is to appeal, to attract the visitors, because it's kind of still complex and it gives an overall impression. And we wanted to attract the people then to come closer to the exhibit and maybe stay there for a while. Then it switches to the second view, where we select a single station. We pre-selected a station, so this selection of the stations is not interactive, but we selected an interesting station with an interesting pattern all over the day. In this case, you're near the Grand Central Station in New York, and where you can see, like in the morning, all the commuters coming in and then taking bikes and riding bikes to Lower Manhattan. And much less complex, at least. And now we have the third view, where we explode the time and space. So on the top part now, it's a bit more complex, of course. On the top part now, you see all the incoming bike rides to that single station, and the lower part, you see all the outgoing bikes. And on the left part of this quadruple, so the 4 ones around one station, the left ones are morning hours, and the right ones are all the rest, so evening and afternoon hours. And what you can then understand, if you look for that for a while, on the left side, for example, old flip and front station, you can understand that this is now an office area or working area. People come there in the morning and leave, orange, right bottom, in the evening. The center part, as I said, is around the central station. And here there's activity all over the day. And the right part, East 14th Street and Avenue, there you see the opposite pattern of the first one, where there are more people starting in the morning and, well, arriving in the evening, so to speak. So you can understand these kind of overall patterns and understand districts and stations of cities. Well, so this was now the exhibit, how it looked like in our exhibition in Berlin. We had the 3 large 2K screens, so high resolution, and we had a little column with an interactive device which looked like this. So you had a couple of statistics, you saw some kind of overall diagram, and you had an interactive time slider, and also you could switch the views. Here, well, a picture of one user using it. But now this was the opening. We had a couple of visitors, of course, and we tried again to learn about that, how they used it and so on. And again, a little bit of a video where you see some of the people watching it, observing it, playing around with it. And as this was exhibited in Berlin, one of our aim, of course, was that we again also had some citizens, some locals of Berlin who know their space, of course, who might even be bike riders, and then compare their own city with the bike sharing systems of others, and maybe already start to understand a bit about the different urban mobilities. All right, so I hope you still can a bit see the video. Hope it is clear enough in the resolution. Well, we will publish this in the upcoming weeks and also on Vimeo, and then you might see it in a bit better ways. What one important aspect here is also that we have all these kind of transitions between the different views in order to keep the viewer following, to make it more understandable how these different views relate to each other. All right, I'm running out of time. Sorry for that. All right, anyway, so our design process here helped us to select and fine-tune the visualizations in order to encourage visitors to shift from temporary interest to deeper insight into a complex phenomenon. Okay, to conclude, So what I presented today is the process I often use in my project and we often use in our project. So this is, of course, not only one. Often there are very precise questions or tasks in the beginning. But as you all know from your own project, I guess, often it is not. So the design process allows you to think about that. Sketching, be it on paper, be it with an own tool, gives you time to think. It allows you to explore new ideas and also compare that to prior work of your own and of others. So one suggestion is know your tools and also from time to time work quick and dirty. So try out lots of things instead of only dwell on the one perfect solution. So, and don't be afraid to question and to doubt also your own ideas. Yes, this can be exhausting, but I think it also can really create good results. So, of course, realize when you work too long on a maybe less important part of the problems. I sometimes do that. But when you throw away something, document early and document a lot. I mean, we all know the saying, kill your darlings. But from time to time, look back into your sketchbook and see what was good and what might be worth to reconsider. And time here helps to filter these two. So overall, I think this very much relates to what Paolo said in his opening. DataWiz is both a research and a communication tool. So use visualizations to understand data, to find insights, and to explore different perspectives. So what I want to say with this metaphor really is, sometimes you advance slowly, and sometimes you advance quickly. And while the path might not always be perfectly straight, embrace that visualizations often need designers who are eager to explore. Thanks.
Thank you, Till.
Till, if you have time,
I don't know if he's able to hear you.
Can you hear me? Till,
but I'll try.
Maybe it's better without the microphone.
Okay. So if you have some minutes, would like to ask some questions, right? Okay.
Yeah, please go for it.
Okay, so, but I have to speak with microphone.
And then you repeat it again.
So I repeat.
Okay.
If you have questions, I think before years, I think we have some minutes to. I would like to ask questions. I hope maybe you have also questions. And but I mean, how many designers do you have in your research labs? I mean, we spoke all day about design. Where you both run 2 research labs that are quite connected to what we do, but what is your relationship with design as a discipline? Do you have designers in your labs? And if not, what could be? What is the relationship? What is the relationship you see with design? I mean, you Till mentioned a lot the word design. So what's going on? So what is the role you see for design in case, and what could be the connection with our respective disciplines?
Right, yeah. The Urban Complexity Lab in Potsdam.
We don't hear you. Till?
Yeah, sorry.
Yes, now, okay, now it's fine.
All right, so the Urban Complexity Lab in Potsdam is, well, it's related to both. So to the design department, but also to an institute for urban future. And that also results in having us lots of different researchers and also students working here. But mostly we're working also with students who are interface and interaction designers. But as design often is in an interdisciplinary team, also in our case, this is that we have, we have computer scientists, we have, classical designers, let's say, but we also have people from a cultural studies background, for example. And so we try to bring all these kind of disciplines together. And I think this works really well if you're if you are a good team. I mean, of course, you need to learn from each other. Because as a designer, you often have to jump onto different topics, onto different domains. And as a computer scientist, you might not know how to design and so on. So I think one of the very important things we learn in also designing and creating data visualization is, well, yeah, work together, work interdisciplinary, and don't be afraid to just, well, accept when you don't know something and talk to others.
Thank you, Till. And Farida?
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with what Till was saying as well. I mean, the story for us is slightly different in that we don't have any designers in the lab right now, but that's not because we didn't try. And so I think one thing that is maybe worth saying very honestly is that to try and get the funding to set up a digital social media lab, we had to try for 2 years because no funder understood what we were trying to do. And we got trashed every single time with reviews, right? So what we were up against 3 years ago, 4 years ago, was also the wider framework for funding that had a particular idea about big data, right? So if you think about what can you ask for funding for, you have to be strategic, right? So the argument that in the end we made after rejection number 2, which involved a much more ambitious project with Jen Lowe, actually. And that's the argument we made, that we said on one hand we want to look at images and this is important and we need to write against the dominant way in which big data is talked about, and part of that is visualization. Part of that is taking images seriously, but part of it is also how do you visualize, how do you deal with direct visualization. So one of the things that we really wanted to do in the second iteration of our idea was to try and offer an alternative to essentially the work of Language in terms of direct visualization, to say, okay, that's really interesting and that's super important, but there's other ways to think about this, and there's other ways to try and combine those kinds of things with actually detailed analysis, right? And going deep and actually trying to understand what this is all mean. That's what we tried to do. That got trashed in the reviews. And so when we finally wrote the bid that got us the funding for the lab, we said, for now, we're going to be strategic and we're going to make it about images, first of all. And we're going to partner with the Manchester School of Art, only with the art historians, for now, right? So it was very strategic because we understood that if you talk about complexity has no money. Complexity does not get funded, right? So you have to understand how much complexity you can fish and be smart about it. And that's what we learned. We learned the hard way because nobody's giving us any money. So now that we have this first pot of money, we got more money on the back of that. And now that we are working on it, hopefully the density, is the next phase of what we want to do in the lab, is bring in the designers finally. Because what we think is really important is essentially if I make a presentation of my work and tools, that's what I want. That's what I would like in the lab, right? So in terms of all of the discussions that Jill's presentation highlighted in terms of document everything, think about how you make all the choices, we're doing that at the level of these data sets and thinking about how you define things and so on. But we would like that exactly that same kind of attention to them presenting that and thinking about how you make those choices. And I think when you're doing something around refugee crisis, there's a lot at stake. So that's the thing. So it's really interesting to see the kind of the transportation data because you also see then these forms of visualization that then get adopted, but you're visualizing people, but very different kinds of people with very different kinds of political outcomes for showing their sense of visualization. And those are all the questions that we would like to ask. So in the next round of very much funding, designers are on board. So we'll try again.
Yeah, it's something that happens other times. I mean, we see other disciplines, let's say, doing design without designers, and then discovering that design. If you want to do design really, you needs that. And that's something that sometimes placing needs time to understand it, but when you get it, so it's not it's not new in a way for us. But same with the humanities. But now, it's interesting. I'm curious about one thing. If there are no other questions from you, because I have one question specifically. You mentioned Lev Manovich and the work he's doing with pictures. And I'm curious about, and we say partly you saw some limits, or you see some limits in that approach. Is it right that you see some limits in this kind of analytical approach to image? And if yes, what are the limits that you see, and what you would like to have that you don't see right now in the analysis of these big sets of data, of images, pictures?
Yeah, we can talk about this a lot more as the episode goes. But I think, so if you look at, I don't know how many of you are familiar with the work of Andrew's team. South City is a really famous one, Brooklyn. Like, essentially what they work on is scraping very large data sets from Instagram, recently made Instagram, and using different direct visualization techniques to try and say, these are all the selfies in these smart cities, and this is, what we can say about these populations. Now, what I think there's a really big difference between their approach and what we're trying to do is that I think they stay at the level of a very superficial level of engagement with content, right? So they might have 10 million selfies, but what they're trying to look at is particular attributes of that content in order to say, let's look at head tilts, or let's look at color variations, or let's look at are people smiling, let's look at these different things that you can actually on a surface level identify in the content, but then they make very significant or quite big leaps to suggest, for example, if someone is smiling in a photograph, in a selfie, that means that somebody's happy. Now, hands up, how many of you have posted selfies of you smiling and you're actually like miserable and you're smiling through the tears and it actually has no bearing whatsoever on your emotional state? Right? This is a history of family photography. You smile in the family photograph. That does not mean that you are one happy family. Right? So it's the assumptions that go into that superficial identifying particular attributes of the content that then can lead, in my opinion, to very skewed readings of what might be going on in these cities, right? To say, oh, people must have been really miserable because nobody's finding a selfie. Well, maybe that's culturally specific to Muscovite, Russians, whatever. But I think if you're going to make a very big leap from superficial reading of content to a reading of what is going on in cities, whatever, then you're at a level of interpretation without thinking about, what else might you bring to the reading of these images that might complicate your reading. And so that's what I think what they're doing, and I think is really interesting technically. But I think at the level of in-depth analysis, I'm not convinced.
Yeah, so I wonder what do you think about automatic recognition of the content of a picture? So really, that's
not much.
that's even, yeah. So, other questions from any here? Anybody has a question? Too tired? Nobody?
Well, it wasn't exactly a question, it was more, like an observation coming, especially what we were talking about, and the fact that the difference that you noticed from the discussion you saw on Twitter or on Instagram or in general on online media compared to the discussion on newspapers, and the fact that there was a lot coming up and a lot of people sharing this picture of Iron Curry, and at the same time also some artists trying to elaborate and to to see and to look at this picture as sort of, and at the very fact of sharing it in a sort of political act. And I think it was really interesting seeing the fact that this discussion didn't appear in the newspaper. Nobody was specifically talking about this sharing itself of this picture and the elaboration that had been going through. And I think it can be quite challenging for design education as well, and combining not just you've been working a lot with art historians and people who are trying to, or they already have methods to interpret images. But I think it would be also useful to have to work more about education in not just in reading images, but in the production of images, and to merge these two knowledge. And also because sometimes I feel like journalists, they are not pushing some kind of information in a sort of shyness if they're not sure about what they're publishing, what they're writing, and also because there's a lack of knowledge and how to interpret how am I given this information, so they rather pull back. And no, it was just an observation of how this new media, they're not like traditional media, are not anymore probably. In this agenda setting they were doing before, and it was probably because of this lack of knowledge, and that is something that I think design, especially communication design, can help with.
The short answer, yes.
Yeah.
I mean, we talked about this already, but I mean, yeah, absolutely. This is a really, really complex issue because I think in many ways, on the one hand, I think our report is very, extensive, and we try to do a lot. On the other hand, it's like maybe like 1% of what we could have done. Like there's so many things that we didn't do. But I definitely think that, and I totally agree with you in terms of, journalists having to do this also quickly, right? So we call this quick, but it still took months, right? If you're a journalist and you're kind of like in the, the eye of the storm, then it is much easier to just pull some tweets or pull some immediate comments and just represent them, verbatim to say, people on Twitter think this, right? I mean, the stuff that you have to do to put this stuff in context is really, really difficult. And I think to try and think through what are the different ingredients that you need to bring to the table to then be able to do this kind of forensic analysis and actually say, hang on, there was this like 5-hour timeline and all this other stuff is happening on Twitter. That's really, really difficult. I can't do that, right? So that's one component. Francesca could do that. And so then we're like, oh, what could Google bring to the table? So it's like this kind of layering of what are all the different things you might be able to do. But I think what you're saying in terms of the process, this is where we would like to take it next, because that's what we would love to be able to show. How do you now represent this incredibly complex ecosystem? There's all this stuff happening on Twitter. There's all this stuff happening in mainstream media. There's all these feedback loops. Right? So I can kind of see in my head what that would look like, but I can't design it. I can probably explain it to you, and you can just, and that's, I think, where this conversation needs to go, because the next time, I would like to be able to say, and actually this is what this complexity is starting to look like. And even if that is still not the correct way of representing it, or it's just the first stab at it, I think that's where we need to start to go, to actually visualize this ecosystem in this way, because at the moment, it's kind of very flat. And what we know when we're trying to just track one image, it's almost impossible, right? Because the other thing that we didn't do is how does this image move across the web? What do you need to be able to have to track this image across the web? And technically, that's incredibly difficult. Because then you have to think about this infrastructure of the web. Are you tracking a single URL? Are you using computer vision, what are you using, what are you tracking, how are these things indexed, you know, like all of those things. So there's all of these things that you can imagine. Wouldn't it be lovely if we could do that? So most of it is pretty much impossible. But I think this we can start to solve. This we can start to say, okay, here are some really solid design principles that can help us tell the story of our research. And that's what I would love. So if we can do that, that would be really great. Because I think that's how you incrementally start building knowledge and bring more people on board and start to tell the complex stories in a more complex way.
Great. So,
thank you.
Thank you, Till. Thank you, Till, I'm sorry we can't offer you some beer, but maybe next time.
Yep. Thanks, please. Have a nice day.
Okay, so
thank you for your time.
Bye. Okay. Bene, grazie, è finita ragazzi, ce l'abbiamo fatta. Abbiamo sperimentato questo nuovo format con i guest speaker. Non so se capisce, ma cosa ne pensate? Va bene? Va bene, non va bene, forse lo capisce. No, credo che sia interessante, il loro feedback credo sia molto interessante per noi vedere quello che fanno gli altri. Gli altri che fanno design senza i designer, questo è un gancio che vi stiamo dando. Ce ne sono un sacco che fanno design senza i designer. Fateci caso, sono tutte piste per il prossimo step della vostra carriera.
Ad esempio le tesi.
Molti dei temi che sono stati toccati potrebbero tranquillamente diventare dei temi per ulteriori approfondimenti, di tesi. Sono venute fuori tante cose, tante domande aperte sulle quali magari qualcuno di voi ha voglia di andare avanti su questo percorso. Comunque, per le tesi del tirocinio magari su questo vi manderemo comunicazioni ad hoc. So che ci sono degli insider qui rispetto ai tirocini, anche però adesso lo eliminiamo subito. Basta, direi che l'aperitivo è lì, vicino. Grazie a tutti.